I'm going to head and kick off our final session. So welcome. My name is John Bischof. I'm a distinguished McKnight University professor of mechanical and biomedical engineering and the Medtronic Bakken Endowed Chair for Engineering and Medicine at the University of Minnesota. I direct our ERC, Advanced Technologies for the Preservation of Biological Systems at the University of Minnesota. There are 6 other institutions, and we actually just wrapped up our site visit, which is a whole other thing to talk about another time. By way of disclosures, I am a founder of North Star Cryo, a startup, and I have a subcontract with several other small companies that are part of the Silvatica Expanse universe of companies, and no other speakers in the sessions have relevant disclosures. So I'm delighted to introduce our closing session on next steps in network ethics. Unfortunately, Dr. Keisha Varma was unable to be with us today, so I will be co-moderating this session with Professor Susan Wolf, a Regents professor who you all know well here at the University of Minnesota and a principal investigator for the NetEthics project, who you've already met, I think, several times today. This session is a roundtable with 9 members of the NetEthics project Ethics and Public Policy panel to consider ethical issues and next steps in 3 kinds of research networks: those in biomedicine, those addressing issues in artificial intelligence and other engineering domains, and those research networks focusing on environment, agriculture, and food. So we've convened 3 panels, and in each panel, we'll ask these experts to reflect initially on a key question. Then we'll turn to questions from the audience. The first of our 3 panels will tackle research ethics and biomedical research networks. We have 4 expert participants. I'll introduce each very briefly and pose a key question. Their full bios are on the conference website. First, let me turn to Dr. Insoo Hyun, Director of the Center for Life Sciences at the Museum of Science, Boston. Dr. Hyun, what ethical challenges have you seen arise in research networks? Does it matter whether the network is organized versus less organized? And you have 3 minutes.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I don't know if the problems are worse if the networks are well organized or not so well organized. I suspect it would be worse when they're not well organized, depending on what you mean by not organized. But I'm going to identify 4 types of problems that I've observed, whether it was being on a member of one of these networks in the biomedical sciences, evaluating some of these networks on the behalf of funders. So I've kind of seen it from both the inside and the outsider view. 4 different scenarios that I don't think normally appear on people's radar when they think about sort of research ethics 101. Okay, so the first one is your network, a rather large network, gets funded, and you have the people that you have. Okay, and sometimes individuals in the network, especially if they're kind of younger, newer career folks, are really trying hard to wedge in their research agenda that has predated the funding opportunity, has predated this network, and are kind of trying to slot in the research they would have done anyway. And there's a bit of a tension that causes between the network and network leadership and the funder and the funding aims. So a little bit of a mismatch. And you can understand why some younger faculty do that, because they need tenure promotions, right? And they need to sort of focus on what sort of in their portfolio, maybe outside of that network, is the coherent sort of story of their scholarship. So there's that sort of tension of sliding in. The second type of, and then the question is, well, how do you manage that as a network leader, as a PI? The second type of problem is the network chugs along. It's a multi-year project. And it might be, let's say, something that's funding going from bench to bedside. So in the beginning, it was a well-oiled machine. Everybody's slotted in, doing what they do. It's very well organized. It's very well running. But as time goes on and the research progresses, and you start entering into things like clinical translation, having to partner with industry, having to raise, private funds, the original team may not be the best people for that stage. So what do you do then? Do you start, imagine like, do you have to start sliding people in and out? What about people's careers? Because the later stages of the project may not match best sort of the goals of the network and the career stage and the research interests of the people. So either you, in the beginning, it's a little bit of a mismatch, or it becomes a mismatch later. So again, in both scenarios, how do you manage that ethically, fairly? What are the duties of the leadership of that network? The third one is kind of within the network. If it's a very hot field and you have people from multiple institutions and they're all like leaders in this field, it can get pretty competitive, and people don't always want to share what they're doing with the network for fear of sort of letting out some trade secrets, or what like unique approaches they're taking in the lab, because you're trying to compete to get into the same journals. You're sort of at the same time peers and teammates, but also competitors. So that tension, I've seen how to deal with that. And then the last one, I can't resist bringing this last one up, mainly because I got a call from a reporter this morning who wanted to do a story on pet cloning, because Tom Brady cloned his dog apparently, and I wanted to know, what was my experience with cloning in South Korea? So what I'm bringing up is the tension between government and networks and funders and research teams. In South Korea, for the whole Korean cloning scandal about 20 years ago, what ended up happening was there was enormous pressure from the government to get results. That team was funded by the Office of Technology and Economic Development, not from the quote unquote health and human services sector. Enormous pressure to just move it along, get results. Then you had a network which they didn't have good oversight of what team was doing what part of the project and whether they were succeeding. So they were sort of cutting corners and thinking, well, we'll eventually get there, but we'll just report that we had this milestone. So how to monitor that with a great deal of pressure. Now, there could be...
So we're a bit over, but
so I'll just wrap up. Yeah, there could be other versions of that here, not so extreme, but again, that kind of tension between the top level and the research team.
Oh, okay. I feel like you were, I didn't know that you knew me so well, Insoo. It was like a lot of what you were talking about is exactly what I'm dealing with. Okay, thank you, Insoo. So next we have Professor Rosie Isasi. She's the director of the Institute for Bioethics and Health Policy at the University of Miami. Professor Isasi, the question is, what challenges do networks face in genomic research with the need for large data sets, laboratory capacity, and biorepositories? And you have 3 minutes, and I will sort of raise my hand quietly.
Thank you. I have my nose to go quickly.
Okay.
Genomics Research Network faced the expected operational challenges that we have here in large scale science through this wonderful day, right? Connecting data sets, coordinating laboratories, managing biorepositories. I think that the core of the challenge in genomics, when it differs fundamentally from other scientific networks, is the materials involved. The DNA and associated data, they are identity bearing, they're relational, they're culturally meaningful. They link individuals, communities, and history. So what it means that genomic networks, like others, navigate scientific, legal, ethical, and cultural challenges simultaneously. And the success depends on harmonization across all these domains, right? And one of the main challenges in genomic collaboration in network is the ethical provenance, ensuring that the consent, the cultural context, the obligations attached of the samples and data, they remain visible and respected to network. And very quickly, let me tell you about micro, meso, and other levels. Micro level, standard RCR, we see it very predominantly, like in other cases, but the genomic data is inherently identifiable, have familial implications, and also it creates unique challenges in terms of the consent-aware workflows, provenance preserving documents, but cultural attentiveness in routine lab practices. In my experience too, the main meso-level challenge is coordinating with the multiple laboratories and institutions to work together. When the consent form travels across institutions, legal systems, and they need to be interpretable. When genomic data affects family, so one of the challenges that I see is access and sharing dispute. They carry broader ethical weight because there are issues of population representation, implications for equity, network cohesion could be fragile. And I also want to talk about the need for policy interoperability, cross-network transparency, but importantly, key this shared cultural ethos of stewardship and fairness. When we have limited tools at the macro level, and I think that is really important, the challenges concern for me are societal impact and public trust. Genomic networks influence narratives about ancestry, identity, and population difference. So if we think about all these levels and the traditional challenge we see, here it maybe is a matter of scale and weight rather than being uniquely distinct. So there's also potential for misuse, uses of discrimination and surveillance that create a different level of awareness, the need for anticipatory governance and community engagement. So we're going to summarize. I would say that what is different? What is different is probably these ethical, cultural, and province-related challenges that are uniquely complex and acute because of the nature of the data, the samples, and the research that takes place. Maybe I still have some minutes, but I wanted to give time for Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rosie. So finally, next we have Professor Michele Goodwin, Director of the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown University. Professor Goodwin, the question is, I'm sorry?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, sorry. The question is, what ethical challenges arise when research networks cross traditional silos, linking public and private entities and connecting researchers with community members? And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. So I was going to thank you for moderating and for Professor Wolf and the entire team that has helped to bring this convening together. So I was at the German embassy just a few days ago as it recognized and paid attention to the 80th year anniversary of Nuremberg. And as those of us who gather on this call know, that out of the tragedy of Nuremberg was a doctor's trial. Most people overlook that, but I imagine that those of us in our community understand that the doctor's trial and that it wasn't just a matter of how does one pay attention to the people who directed such atrocities, but that doctors participated in that. And out of that came a platform for ethics, 10 principles that many now sort of hone in around 4 of them. Matters of autonomy, primum non nocere, first do no harm, the critical importance of being committed to social justice is also being part of what coheres around those principles, all of which say so much about a fiduciary relationship. What matters as we think about this public and private relationship, there are certain things to keep in mind, and I'll outline just a few of them in the few minutes that we start, is that one, experimentation technology outpaces law, outpaces how people understand, things. I mean, very often law does not get involved until at some point there is a crisis. And we can think about that across anything. I've mentioned Nuremberg. We can think about the U.S. Public health service involved in Tuskegee, what other people call the Tuskegee study, which extended decades beyond Nuremberg. You think about Henrietta Lacks, and there are so many episodes in our nation's history, whether it is involved with experimentation with people in the military, whether we're talking about the John Moore case, lots of them. So how do we understand these things? In just a couple of principles that I'll speak to really quickly. So one of the issues happens to be the partnership that can break down between the public and the private, but that is critically important. And how do we turn back to partnership? Certain communities are sought after because they are a community We can do research with them, but do they always get the knowledge back that they put in? I think about the South Side of Chicago. Any researcher who wants to think about Black people in the United States and a group that you can reach. South Side of Chicago is a place where people often go to. But when I've met with community members, whether they've been at churches, et cetera, about that, they say, people have come into our community in order to do research, but we never hear back about what is taking place. Another issue happens to be trust and power disparities between the public and the private. There are economic disparities between the public and the private. And very often, and I'll conclude here, there are disparities in terms of economic resources, where the private sometimes is able to put a thumb on the scale in terms of what can take place, and the public side just goes along with. And sometimes the public side, just to get the resources to do a thing, will collaborate with the private, even if the interests don't fully align, but just because that's where the economic power happens to be. I'll end with that, and we can take up more in Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Goodwin. Finally, we have Professor Alex Capron, University Professor Emeritus at the University of Southern California. Professor Capron, some research networks cross national borders. Does that pose special ethical challenges, and what tools can help in navigating those challenges? And you have 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, John. Throughout today's conference, we've heard about the special issues that arise when researchers conduct big team science, organized research networks in which scientists and engineers from multiple institutions are spread out over a number of research sites. The conclusion is that they need to address the special ethical issues that arise at this meso level, between the micro level, that is ethical issues that concern the whole of society, and the micro level, ethical issues of individual researchers and small teams. Most of what we've heard about relates to networks developing and supporting the ability to identify ethical issues and to address these through establishing policies and procedures among the institutions. I will discuss the issues that arise when research becomes more complicated because of legal rules on the privacy of personal data in health research when a network needs to cross national boundaries. Such scope can be essential in studying rare diseases or the safety of interventions with infrequent risks, or in emergencies such as a pandemic caused by a novel virus. In these circumstances, researchers may need to share data which can encompass biological samples as well as digital records and images, or even create their own dedicated databank to hold these separate records. And besides transferring a copy of data, rules about privacy typically also apply to having remote access to data that is examined in the repository where it is held, without actually transferring the complete record. Although the major difficulties in trans-border research involve the US and European collaborators caused by the EU General Data Protection Regulation, promulgated almost a decade ago, even research networks within Europe face problems because of the inconsistent way the GDPR has been incorporated into national laws across the continent. For research involving US research teams, challenges arise from US mass surveillance programs, namely the access that US law enforcement and national security agencies have to our personal data that is held in the United States, which run afoul of the stringent rules of the GDPR. A recent article concluded that collaborations are increasingly impeded when they involve the US and the EU countries. This arises particularly in sharing data with US public institutions because both federal bodies, such as NIH and research institutes and universities funded by the federal and most state governments enjoy sovereign immunity, which is inconsistent with the enforceable rights and legal remedies that the GDPR provides to research subjects. In an article last year, John Ioannidis of Stanford and some European colleagues concluded that the adoption of the EU-US adequacy decision in July of 2023, which holds that rules promulgated by the Commerce Department adequately protect research data that's transferred to the U.S. They conclude that
Professor
that does
Capron,
not
can you
hold the
please
promise for a long-lasting solution due to the risks and challenges that it will be invalidated yet again by the Court of Justice. The upshot is that biomedical research networks will need to develop individual codes of conduct, binding contracts, or other compacts that meet the GDPR requirements and that take account of any special legal requirements for research with human beings that exist in U.S. states from which data are collected.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Capron. We'll have time for questions after all three panels have presented, so please remember to post your questions and comments using the QA function in the Zoom. And for the second panel on AI and engineering research networks, let me turn it over to Professor Wolf.
Great. So we've been talking about biomedical research networks. Let's switch gears. Now we want to talk about the ethical challenges in research networks focusing on artificial intelligence, AI, and related engineering. And as we know, some of these are enormous networks. So first, let me turn to Dr. Barbara Evans, who is both professor of law and professor of engineering at the University of Florida. Professor Evans, what challenges face AI research networks that involve both industry and academia? And realistically, if academia depends on industry to bring the funds, to bring the enormous computing power needed, to bring the data, how does that affect the ethical issues and the potential solutions?
Thank you. I think this is a real challenge because working with AI does almost inevitably require some use of commercial information service providers and some interaction with them. And as we know, different scientific ethics norms apply even to things like, do you scrape the internet for your data or do you get it with consent and crediting IP rights of people whose work you've relied on? So there are some differences. And for academic researchers to collaborate and be able to insist that certain key norms be upheld, they have to have some leverage, something that the commercial party that they're collaborating with wants. And the key sources of those leverage that academicians had were access to grant funding, access to data from their own past research, or in some cases from an academic medical center that was affiliated with them. There was a time when universities had really attractive compute power that it was the best in the state, and people wanted to get to know you to get your computer. And then we have expertise. There's some excellent expertise among scientists and universities. Well, we're in a crisis time where those points of leverage aren't working as well. And I will briefly point out what the problems are and then what I see as a possible strategy to cope with it. One is grants, $6 to $30 million grant is big money, but you look at what the investments, the commercial parties are making to develop AI, and it's 3 orders of magnitude bigger. It's billions of dollars, not millions. And so we don't bring much money to the table as academicians. Our computing power in a world of cloud computing is no longer the big draw that makes people want to get to know us. The data we have, oddly enough, has the value academicians bring to the table has been undermined by the open data sharing policies that came after the late 1990s. We both NIH conditions of grants or just publication policies of peer-reviewed journals. We've got to disgorge all our data, and we gave it away. So people have it now and don't need us to get our past data to the extent they used to. What we do have is expertise. And there was an excellent recent article by Kate Spector-Baghdadi saying that is something that can be leveraged. People will want to collaborate with academic scientists because they have some excellent expertise. But we need to realize that may be a diminishing resource. AI is itself leveling intellect in the way the Industrial Revolution let weaklings still survive. And in coming years, you don't have to be, someone who isn't a genius can still write a good paper, and it's leveling intellect. I don't think it's happened yet. I think the solution here, we think of collaborations as being goal-based, project-oriented collaborations to do a Manhattan Project or discover a specific scientific goal. We need to think of collaborations in a different way, and I mean collaborations about scientific ethical values. And the collaboration we need to forge to leverage our position is for universities to kind of come together and say, what are our bedrock ethical principles that we are going to stand for? And then kind of agree that we're not going to enter collaborations that don't let us uphold that. And we're just not going to do it. And then all expertise would be demanding the same ethical principles, and people would have to respect that to get that expertise. So we need not just the work-oriented collaborations between ourselves and industry, but also we need to get together and decide what is the bedrock bottom line ethics that we're not willing to compromise on and stand for it across academia.
Okay, collective action.
Collective action.
Thank you. All right. Well, next we have Dr. Ken Oy, who is Emeritus Professor of Political Science at MIT. Dr. Oy, how do the different norms in disciplines such as engineering and biomedicine affect ethical practices in AI research networks? I mean, research ethics seems long established in biomedical research, at least modern biomedical research post-Nuremberg, as Michele reminded us, but less so in AI research. Where do we go? How do we put those together?
Susan, 3 minutes, 3 main points. So the first point is if we look back at bioethics, and I agree with the characterization of that as a much more heavily institutionalized and developed area, you have a prompt. And the prompt was Tuskegee. And the Belmont Report acting on Tuskegee to come up with a set of institutionalized standards, the 3 basic points that we've all memorized on respect for subjects, on beneficence, and on justice, with implications for human subjects. Cross over to AI, and we don't have Tuskegee. Thank heavens, not yet. Okay, but there is no clear event prompting attention to the issues and the problems. And in a sense, we also don't have human subjects in the same sense as experimental subjects in biomedical research. There are subject issues, but it's not the same. Second point if we look at the kinds of issues that do present, we have an enlargement beyond the original Belmont principles in medicine, some of which apply quite directly to problems in AI. We've had a lot of discussion from Alex, from Barbara, and others on data and matters pertaining to data, transnational, transgovernmental, privacy issues, and the ethical use of data. Those problems in medicine and those problems in AI cross over, and they cross over very, very directly. And in fact, a heck of a lot of AI is medical in terms of the uses of integrated data sets linked to AI methods for purposes of drug discovery and therapeutics. But AI is different because we also have concerns over things like algorithmic bias. We have another set of implications for labor and for employment that are ethical, that are attentive central issues in AI that don't correspond to what we see in medicine. Finally, I want to make one last point on funding, money, and institutions. If we look at biomedical, we have this little organization called the federal government that plays a significant role in funding research. And this tiny little outfit called NIH matters a lot. 60 million bucks or so in federal money going into biomedical, of which 47 billion or so is NIH. Do you know what the numbers are for AI and the federal government? It's roughly 9-10 billion of unclassified research funding, of which 3 billion is NIH, 2 billion NSF before Trump, and 2 billion DoD unclassified. I mentioned that because the leverage, that was my alarm, I'm sorry. If we look at I shouldn't have done that. I should never have set an alarm.
Yes, you should.
Okay, the final point that I was getting to before my alarm interrupted was that the funding provides the leverage. And we have a set of institutions that act off that, including IRBs, biosafety officers. And we don't have that leverage from federal funding, one agency clearly taking the lead, and that network of institutions to be imposing ethical standards in AI. And I'll stop there. Sorry for setting the alarm and delaying my response.
Great. Thanks to you both. So before I turn it back to John for the third panel on challenges in networks focusing on environmental, ag, and food research, I just want to remind folks that we would love to hear from you in the QA. What is the domain that you're working in? Where do you see the specific ethical challenges cropping up in the area where you're working? So just feel free, let us know what you're seeing in the QA. John?
Great. Thank you, Susan. And so we have 3 participants in the final panel. This panel will focus on ethical challenges in networks focusing on environmental, agricultural, and food research. I'll first call on Dr. Evelyn Brister, Professor of Philosophy at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Professor Brister, the question is, what norms animate conservation biology networks? Are they different from norms in other domains of biomedical and engineering research? And what challenges are looming in conservation biology networks? And you
Thanks for those questions, John. That's good. You heard a lot this morning about different cultures, different research cultures around ethics, especially around different labs, different institutions, but also different disciplines. And I think in the conservation sector, it's a smaller world than biomedical research, and it doesn't have the stable funding that engineering and AI research does. So most conservation research relies on philanthropic and government support, and it's a small enough sector that there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of circulation of individuals between labs, initiatives, and organizations. Another characteristic that's unique to conservation is that the research is aimed at finding solutions to problems with globally connected causes, things like climate change. And ecosystems themselves are connected with each other. So a high percentage of projects and initiatives cross international boundaries, which adds a layer of cultural and regulatory complexity. The result of these characteristics, that there's a normative goal, that there's a smaller research community, and that it's globally connected, is that there's quite a lot of transparency already. And there's a high expectation for transparency. So that's the norm. It includes open science, data sharing when appropriate. So, for instance, non-disclosure agreements about the subject matter of research are nearly unknown in conservation, even though they're not that uncommon in AI research. In many cases, there's also a recognized need for knowledge sharing arrangements with local communities and, including participatory research arrangements. So conservation research has relied really strongly on sharing knowledge, expertise, resources like biological samples, and that culture has the potential to grow stronger as the field becomes larger and more technical when we need more biodiversity conservation. So for instance, an intervention or a pharmaceutical that helps one species fight a fungal infection needs to quickly be adapted to another species. And so we need those kinds of sharing practices. Partnerships between academic researchers, nonprofits, and government agencies are already very common, but corporations are just starting to act in this space. And I think that's going to bring challenges to integrate different cultures into the research networks. For instance, academics and nonprofits, they run on a credit economy. But in the news last week, Colossal acquired the cloning company Viagen, and they took credit for Viagen's earlier collaborative partnerships. And some conservation researchers felt that was inappropriate, both because Colossal hadn't itself been involved in the earlier work and because academic and nonprofit partners weren't mentioned in their publicity. So I guess, to sum up, I'd say that although ethics is a strong consideration in the conservation community already, the issues at the network level still need to be worked out to take into account these changes, especially around the cultural differences between business and academic or nonprofit partners as they relate to data sharing and collaboration.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Brister. Next, we have Dr. Paul Thompson, Professor Emeritus at Michigan State University, where he held the Kellogg Chair in Agricultural, Food, and Community Ethics. Dr. Thompson, the question is, in agricultural and food research networks, who are the key stakeholders and what are the collaborative norms? Are there shared norms across stakeholders as diverse as small farmers, large agriculture corporations, scientific researchers, and consumers? And you have 3 minutes.
Thanks. I want to start out just by observing that the United States has had an institutionalized administrative structure for research networks for well over 100 years. And it's gone through changes and evolution, but I really want to highlight one element of that structure in answering your question, and that would be the Extension Service. This was created by a federal act in, I think it was 1916. Every state has an Extension Service. There's quite a bit of state funding that goes into it. At least at one time, I'm not sure if this is still the case, there were extension offices in every county in the United States. They have many responsibilities as an organization. They're not strictly focused on research. It's probably a fairly small part of their portfolio. But in terms of their role as contributing to research networks, their function was to integrate practitioners into the research networks that were primarily located in USDA labs and also in land-grant universities. Of course, the main practitioners are farmers, but there also would have been nutritionists, many state government officials, and the function of the Extension Services was to create a two-way process of communicating research results to practitioners, but also problems and research needs back to researchers. They helped establish test beds for exploring the success and failures of certain research strategies. And in many respects, it was very successful. I think one of the things that we would note about the history of extension is that they did a very good job of addressing one of the problems that's been noted, which is keeping people informed of what was happening with the research. That was a very active part of what Extension did. These practitioners were incorporated into the system well enough that they Extension agents were very careful to make sure they knew what the results were. But the extension is interesting in our conversation today, I think, for two reasons. One of them is it's an example of one of the most spectacular ethical failures at the meso level, and that was the exclusion of Black farmers in many southern states from access to the full range of extension services. That would include administration of USDA programs and prevent actually conspiring with some other farmers, ways that led Black farmers to lose their farms. I mean, it's really horrible stuff. And USDA has lost several lawsuits along this. Now, a lot of that was not research oriented, but research was certainly part of the story. And it illustrates a way in which an effort to create an outreach and incorporate participants can actually have some distributive problems that in this case was a real failure. I think the other thing to point out is simply that as agriculture becomes more and more incorporated into some of these particularly health-oriented networks, it's important to look at ways in which the institutionalization of this network in agriculture both fits and doesn't fit with some of the work that's going on in some of these emerging.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Our third panelist is Dr. Terry Tiersch. He's the director of the Aquatic Germplasm and Genetic Resources Center at Louisiana State University. Dr. Tiersch, your question is, how can a scientific community, like researchers studying the protection of genetic resources in aquatic species such as yourself, establish norms and practices to support collaborative research networks? What helps? Agreed terminology, shared protocols and data, open science practices, or others? We would love to hear from you.
Well, first, I want to say thank you to John and Susan and the organizers. I'm always very happy and very excited to participate with this group. Let me start by maybe stating a need. So humans have been collecting, storing, and exchanging seeds of important crops for thousands of years. And in the past century, we've begun to freeze the sperm of livestock so we can do the same thing, so we can protect the genetic resources of these largely agricultural commodities. And these have become multi-million-dollar global markets with all the supporting technology and infrastructure needed to facilitate trade all around the world. Now, from that little bit of background, you might assume that aquatic species like fish or shellfish have also been attended to, but they haven't. In fact, most of the effort that's been made has been held or restrained to the research level. It hasn't moved into any application, and certainly not at a scale that will work even at a small level, and absolutely not any kind of infrastructure that could support national, no less international trade. Now, if we look at something successful like livestock, over the past 70 years, we'll see that thousands of researchers devoted their entire careers to developing that infrastructure for like one single species, let's say dairy cattle. But then when we look at aquatic organisms, we'll see that there's thousands of species that are relevant for a variety of reasons, and just really a few dozen people that are working in this area. So this area is grossly underserved with nowhere near the resources needed to move forward. So this is a problem, but it's also an opportunity. Because nothing exists right now, it means that we can put things in place before entrenchment occurs, which could be a barrier, to harmonization or interaction between groups later. Now, a traditional approach would be to promulgate guidelines or regulations from an authoritative entity. And this, it's got good points to it. It should be pursued. But because there's just a generalized lack of capability, we need something more decentralized, more participative. And so we're exploring things that can be simple, dependable, and cheap, and widely accessible. And 3D printing, for example, open hardware gives a lot of opportunities for this. It reduces the barriers to entry, for example, by reducing the costs needed from hundreds of thousands of dollars to simply hundreds of dollars. And open hardware, when you're using it, allows really rapid development and sharing of innovation. And so widespread capability of this type really lowers needs for costs and educational ability, and it helps people get involved. So our approach is to look for structural tools that can improve capability, quality management, standardization, and efficiency that can be shared. And they should also be multi-level and could work across individuals, groups, national centers, multinodal networks, and bridge scope and scale. And we found this has to be really very interdisciplinary. And to make a long story short, that can be very challenging and has downsides. And when you combine disciplines, you often end up with a lack of focus or miss things or have gaps. And to end up, I'll say one important lesson we've learned is that there needs to be a context, a framing that is self-reinforcing, that's comprehensive and can unify, something to help us avoid mistakes. So, although I'm personally trained as a biologist, we've come to realize the best approach to this very large problem is to view it through a lens of manufacturing, converting raw materials, let's say fish sperm, into a commercial product, frozen sperm and straws that can be sold or exchanged. So, in essence, we're trying to create a global genetic inventory for aquatic species that has known value today, potential value for tomorrow, and by having the correct framework, in this case, maybe manufacturing, we can lead ourselves into a balanced interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach and gain ways for people from many, many different areas to participate. So sorry, John, I was a little bit over.
That's all right. Thank you very much. And thank all of the panelists. This was great. I was like furiously writing down a number of wonderful things you were saying. So we've now heard from all three panels addressing research ethics in networks across diverse scientific domains. And now we'll welcome all 9 of the panelists into gallery view, and we'll be able to have a discussion and entertain questions also from everyone who's out there in Zoom land. So please do use the chat if you have a question. And if you do not have a question, I'm sure Susan and I and the assembled panelists will entertain ourselves with many questions to one another.
Well, John, I have
yes.
a question to kick things off.
Yes.
And you're not going to, this is going to be a surprise to you, but it's a question for you. You
Indeed.
actually do lead a big research network, an ERC, ATP Bio. And one of the things that's so interesting about ATP Bio is it actually crosses all of the domains we've just talked about. I mean, it is, as Evelyn and Paul have written about in an article, it's a flexible platform technology. So from where you sit as the leader of this ERC, what do you see, what do you experience as the main challenges in the domain of network ethics and the responsible conduct of research across this 6-institution, 100+ researchers network?
Well, Insoo had me right away because everything Insoo mentioned, I mean, all of the things that were mentioned were relevant and extremely interesting, and I'm actually dealing with many of them. But what Insoo mentioned was really specific, I thought, to the team. And, we talk about convergent team science, and so, it really is about the team and how the team works together or doesn't work together. And so I got struck right away on what Insoo was saying. And Insoo, you can correct me if I got this wrong, but this concept of squeezing in research, I literally was dealing with that yesterday, okay? Literally, where, I'm dealing with faculty members who I personally have a lot of, I mean, I know them personally. We have a relationship. And they work in a specific area, and they are arguing that their area should belong in ATP Bio. And, and I'm speaking to them back and trying to explain to them, yes, you work in this really fundamental, exciting, important area, but you need to make that area relevant to the aims of ATP Bio. So it was like almost exactly what you said, Insoo. I was literally having that conversation yesterday. And then you were talking about team changes over time. And, we went from a team of about 30 to now a team of over 45. And people have literally cycled off, and people are cycling on and literally cycling on right now to address things like how do you use artificial intelligence to discover new cryoprotective agents, for instance, which wasn't even in our original mindset. We didn't even write it in as a project. And then finally, this hot field and the competition, we haven't seen it yet. In fact, that was one of the things that we were saying just yesterday. We just had our site visit. Many of you may know that. But we feel that we've actually been able to sidestep that one so far. And we actually have multiple startups that are in the space. And those startups are actually acting in a collegial manner with each other and with ATP Bio so far. So Insoo, on that one, my fingers are crossed. Okay. But I thought that was a great place to launch this. I could jump into the rest of my notes that I've made here on everything, but I don't want to take up all of our time. So anyways, my answer is that I think the team ends up being where I spend quite a bit of my time.
And so did you want to comment back?
Well, thanks, John. I mean, I've done a lot of evaluation of research networks, and I've noticed this popping up a lot. And I don't know what the best approach is to deal with this. I mean, and I don't even really know how to characterize the problem. It's kind of like a blend of organizational ethics in a way, also kind of like the integrity of the research enterprise in terms of the contract, so-called contract that you have with the funding agency, and honest reporting of that. Also recognizing the dynamics of just careers in academia. It's a very complex issue. So I think it'd be wonderful to kind of think together kind of through this, because I think a lot of teams would be facing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the other things that struck me from many of the other comments that were made, in terms of also, Michele, what you were saying and talking about Nuremberg and so on, I was reflecting, we actually, we don't really need law until things go wrong, right? And then we need law. And then I was thinking about what Evelyn was saying, that when you're working across boundaries and across the world, really, there are less laws, really, in some sense, governing that. No NDAs and things of that nature. And then I was thinking about what Terry's trying to do with his product, And so I don't know if anybody wants to jump in there and talk about that, but like, to what extent are we actually constrained by too much laws in some cases? And then to what extent can we take advantage of the fact that we don't have laws in some of these global environments that could actually accelerate some things?
Or the mix. I'll start us off, right? So if we're to think about a matter of assisted reproductive technologies, is very limited federal laws for many years, just the federal success rates law, which really doesn't tell us what does success mean within these spaces. But we see this space where individuals are urgent in the desire to create families, individuals and couples. And here from this space, you have individuals working with clinics and with their lawyers creating networks to be able to get that done. And on the other hand, if you look abroad, and for much of that, right, with some real care and consideration about how do you get this right? How do you avoid lawsuits? How do you preserve people's dignity? And folks figuring that out in that marketplace. And then you go abroad to a place like India, go into a place like Bihar, where you have the choices being really fraught in terms of what someone's going to do. For that woman, she might go to a brothel, she might be underage married, or It's go to Delhi or another major city and become a gestational surrogate. But for so many of those women, they lack literacy. They sign contracts with an X or a thumbprint. They do something very important for Americans, but at the same time, their rights are deeply constrained. And I'll give one example and turn it over to others. If you're looking to make sure that there is a birth outcome, there could be the desire that there are multiple embryos implanted, and that happens, but the desire to bring home only one or two. Those women ultimately, at the end of the day, lack any real choice in terms of what happens with their body or offspring when the Americans come, get what they want, and go back. And it raises many other questions for American law. So the Americans have come, they've taken the one or the two children back home, but let's say there were quadruplets and there are two that are left. If the Americans aren't claiming them, and India isn't claiming them either, then you have a certain statelessness. And so there are many other examples that could be offered where, yes, these tensions between law and ethics, public and private, emerge.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Michele, it reminds me of an article I just read in the New York Times about these women who end up having children out of pregnant, or they're out of marriage in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you saw that article in the Times, but that's an even more disastrous situation and just horrible. I see Rosie and then Ken.
Yeah, I wanted to address that question is, do we have too many or too little laws? And I think the question is not much, or I would not like to frame it in terms of do we have necessary laws, but rather it's an issue of governance. Do we have enough policy, enough gatekeeping, and across the board rules of the game that allows a network, a collaboration, an enterprise to move with integrity and fulfilling the purposes? And one of these issues is connecting one of the questions in the chat is how can we build trust between the academic network and the public, etc. Is that part of governance is not related with the law, might be related to a policy, is participation, is public participation and building this representative. And I give you the example of just a big network of networks, the All of Us research program. Okay, it's a biobank, it's a big research program, but it's composed of over 30 very complex networks that cross research and clinical practice. And the way they have distilled a number of the ethical, social, and policy issues we have talked across have been by including participants, those ultimately affected, into the decision-making process. So it's not whether the law give us enough privacy protections. It's not that when all of us is going to collaborate with foreign partners and commercial companies, whether in the US or not. It's about that engine, that architecture that binds everything together.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie. I see Ken and then Alex, and then we're going to go to Q&A in the chat.
Okay. I want to respond to the question on too much law and regulation. I spent today at a meeting at the Ramon Arceres Foundation in Madrid. And it was a conference largely on AI. And the speakers were part of the AI network with particular interest in business applications. How do you think references to regulation came up? One speaker was talking about the unrealistic burdens imposed by the EU data protection requirements. Another talked about privacy and ownership and the constraints imposed by requirements to be attentive to IP. Another talked about human in the loop as a problem because it would diminish the ability to capture efficiency gains from AI. And finally, there were people denouncing antitrust regulation as precluding the kind of cooperation and exclusion that would have made for better strategies. That was the AI network. It's a little bit different from ours, but I did spend today, quote, doing research, close quote, as a participant observer. There were other more favorable references to regulation, but I don't count them because I made those remarks. But the tech bros are have a different perspective, and let me shut up there.
All right. I see I've really kicked the hive here. Sorry, guys. Alex?
I was going to point out that a good deal of the regulatory things, and Ken just referred to some of this, arise because of the abuses that occur in the commercial space. So Terry was lamenting the absence of commercial interest in fish sperm compared to bull sperm. But in other areas, the commercial area, which is not focused on the set of values that supposedly are inherent in research in our current world, but on profit and maximization thereof, have caused the need for regulations that then spill over into this area. And most of the concerns about US use of Europeans' data arose as just private information, not just health information, arose because of the internet companies and social media companies. And so we have to deal with that. Those concerns, I think, also things that are not on the table all the time. And Michele's mention of surrogacy in India, I think, has been underregulated in part because of the Indian government's very strong drive to make themselves a global deliverer of healthcare. And it's complicated also organ transplantation because the abuses there of paid donors are well known. And I would say in the United States, Michele, we don't have regulations, although the reproductive area has really remained the Wild West of medical care, because the people who usually would press for protecting women, namely on the more democratic and liberal side of things, are concerned that regulating surrogacy will provide an excuse for the people on the other side of the reproductive freedom argument to say, well, look, if we're regulating surrogacy and we say women's health choices can be regulated, that means that we can regulate abortion the same way. And so when there's a failure because of outside constraints, we get into this kind of problem. I'm not sure that I see those issues as arising the same way in the network area, research network area, except as to the existence of these data privacy things that are really driven by abuses in the commercial space.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to go to the Q&A in the chat. And so this is from Dan Chen. He's actually part of ATP Bio. He's our Strategic Partnership and Innovation Director. He says, Dr. Goodwin made such an important point using the residents of the South Side of Chicago on closing the loop, quote unquote, on research involving subjects. What role can research networks play on this topic, question mark, and what other means can research networks use to build trust between the public and academic institutions?
Well, a couple of thoughts on that. Thank you so much for the question. Might very well be advisory boards that include members from the community, that build in accountability, that build in a return. I might surprise some researchers that members of community, they like to hear, well, what happened? You talk to me. So let's say it's qualitative. It's not even something involving a poke or a prod, but it was gathering information. There are people who really wonder, well, what happened? What was the result? Did it transform anything? Was it part of a paper? Was it part of a book? And returning to that, one of the easier ways to return is that if there are members from the community who are involved in some way, connected in some way to the research that's being done, and then that helps to facilitate closing the loop. I'd also say something else for those that have not been involved, but that and I mentioned the South Side of Chicago because I did a lot of work in the South Side of Chicago. You have communities that are tethered together through their religious networks and otherwise, where even sharing with those spaces, we were doing research on this. Here is what we learned, and here's what here's what we discovered, and we just love to share with your community. And if you wouldn't mind distributing, is another way. Now, I recognize the sensitivities that are associated with all of this, but I guess the first part would, in fact, be more inclusive engagement and just simply remembering to return.
That's great. Thank you. We have one more in the chat from Inge Haugen, who asks, how do librarians support the work you are doing, particularly in the processual aspects of ethics at individual micro, meso, and macro levels? Sometimes it's the service of teaching, for example, about plagiarism, that is more supportive than simply making a report or toolkit on plagiarism available. I also wonder about outputs that might end up, quote unquote, lost between institutions in the team science network of network systems. And I think that's broadly to the panel. So whoever, oh, Alex, do you want to take a gander?
No, I wanted to add on something to Michele's comment, so I'll hold back.
Oh, okay, maybe hold then, if you don't mind. Did anyone want to answer about the question about librarians? Maybe Susan, if you have a thought.
Well, we've actually worked quite a bit with the librarians here and compared notes with others within ATB Bio about their libraries and data repositories in the collaborating institutions. I mean, our library is very involved, as many are, in questions of data archiving, open science, making publications available, compliance with federal rules on that. So they, the old days of libraries, I hope this is music to Inga's ears, even though it's old news, are gone. Libraries are really knowledge management experts. And so I agree that they have a crucial role to play.
Yes, I agree too. I married one, so. Rosie,
Yes.
Rosie, and then Alex.
On the librarians, for research networks in the past, I have experienced that we have collaborated with them, and particularly with public local libraries, as a vehicle to raise awareness, improve health literacy, etc., but a way also of reaching the community. So not an ascertainment side, but rather how do we reach them? How do we understand their needs? How do we improve how we socialize and build trust between researchers, the academic institute, and the community? So it has been a very, very rewarding experience to bring it together beyond the traditional world of the repository of data, right? Is the hub of where we can get together and
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie. Alex, did you want to follow? You wanted to go back to Michelle's.
Yes, obviously it is an ethical obligation to keep subjects informed. And I saw the value of that when the Patus were colleagues of mine. They're now at Downstate Medical Center, and they conduct longitudinal genetic cancer research. And they have a regular newsletter that goes to every person who has participated in their research. And they get referrals because of that. And they get people who are very willing to come back in as new samples might be needed or whatever, because people feel involved. And just as we all know in medicine, that patients are in effect the teachers of their residents and interns and postdocs and so forth. So too, the research subjects play a participant role in this way. And I think it shows that there's a self-interest in everyone. None of these things are unique to networks. A single center conducting research and returning the results to the community can find an equal benefit.
John, I wonder
Yes.
as we reach the last minutes of this panel, if I could ask our great panelists to reflect on what I think is, in some ways, the core puzzle that animates network ethics. We've all been talking all day about this gap, this relative lack of work at the level of the research organization, the network level. But Michele, with your comments, you took us back to the beginning of modern research ethics, the origin of the Nuremberg Code. And if you look at the animating research horrors, research scandals that really drove the creation of modern research ethics, the conduct tried in the medical trial, the horrors in the concentration camps in the name of science, Tuskegee, Beecher's list, the long list, almost every one of them is not just an individual ethics failure, it's a massive failure at the level of organization, sometimes entire countries. And yet, when you look at, for example, the Nuremberg Code, the list of 10, it's really mostly about individual researchers, the necessity of free informed consent. When you look at what became the common rule, it really focuses largely on the duties of individual researchers and small research teams. What happened? How did we lose this organizational level that we're now trying to recover? And maybe I'll start with you, Michele.
It's a brilliant question, Susan. It's a brilliant question. You are absolutely right. Sometimes it's countries, it's whole universities, it's health systems, it's a nation's healthcare system when we think about Tuskegee, and we reduce it, where people think it's a university and people at university rather than, no, that was Public Health Services of the United States involved in doing that. And what is that about? Some of that, at least in our US system, may be what we've been accustomed to in terms of our legal system and holding to account, which has largely been individuals, where there may be larger systems that are involved in things that are terrible, but how do we prosecute? How do we find liability? It usually targets just the individual rather than the larger. One trend that we're beginning to see, but it is very, very slow and it's very thin, has been at the state's attorneys general level, where there have been state's attorneys general that have gone after the big. Let's go after the entire hospital or this entire network. In Minnesota, you might remember it was some years ago, there was unethical conduct that was taking place in affiliation with some of the hospitals there. It was called the shakedown. And there was a Senate commission to look at this shakedown where there were patients actually being forced to pay before they got treatment, which was in violation of federal law. Well, the then Attorney General of the state of Minnesota said, nope, we're not going to stand for this. We'll call you to account and you can no longer do business, this whole network in the state of Minnesota. So rare, incredibly rare. I would say one last thing before I conclude, which is that Kamala Harris, as Attorney General in California, engaged somewhat similar, but these are new species. It's attorneys general. And so it's not really spaces that we typically look to where systems have been called to account for unethical behavior.
Well, I see two hands and we're coming to the end. So probably we have time for Ken and then Alex, and then I'll wrap it up. Ken?
Susan, and a brilliant question. And great answer so far, but I want to push back just a little bit. The current system actually holds institutions responsible for violations by individuals. And, we've heard of situations where institutions get upset because one person for a trivial amount of money is violating the rules. And the leverage of loss of eligibility for NIH funding is a big club. So I actually think that the institutions play a slightly larger role while understanding and appreciating the point that the laws are written in a way that hold individuals responsible in the Anglo-American tradition. But those institutions are not off the hook in the current system.
Great point. Alex?
I was going to say partly that. I think the reason that you look at Nuremberg and the subsequent documents like the Declaration of Helsinki, they are thinking of ethics as an individual matter, the obligation, going back to Hippocrates, of the physician to the individual patient. But in fact, there are many, many ways in which institutions are held. Ken mentioned one that under the federal common rule, institutions can lose, and they can lose in part their right to do any research for a period of time if their ethics system fails as a general matter. So when institutions fail, not just when an individual in a particular research project does, but they can lose that. And moreover, in the clinical area, there has been a lot of attention for the past 20 years on patient safety, and that has been at an institutional level. And we now think that people suffer harm when teams fail. Now, they're not teams that are operating at multiple institutions, but they are a team at an institution. It's not just the bad apple, the individual doctor. So I actually disagree with the premise that it is somehow neglected and that it is so unusual for us to be thinking in institutional terms.
Well, let me wrap things up. I think actually, Alex, you just made my point, because we have been looking all day at a particular kind of organization that does cross multiple institutions.
Yes, that's true, of course.
And a research network that's a little harder to get your hands around than a specific institution like the University of Minnesota or Massachusetts General Hospital, or I see Ken nodding, MIT. It's a more complicated research organization. I want to thank all of you. My gosh, what a great panel. I wish we had much more time. And all of our speakers and moderators here today. I also very much want to thank our audience for thoughtful questions. As I said at the beginning of the day, the real intent was a working conference. And we hope that we've catalyzed more thinking, more questions, and more work on where do we go from here to fill out this meso level, to really think together. Here we are, 2025, these complex research networks stretching across the country, stretching across the globe are real. They're really happening. They're huge players in the world of research. We need to rise to the occasion. We need to partner with the people who've been studying the science of team science and the realities of big team science, and who've been working on stakeholder and community engagement. This is a big collaboration. We hope we've begun to move it forward and advance the conversation. The fruits of this conference, this video will immediately be available online so that you can share it, so that you can use it, so you can think about next steps. Look at our resources. It includes some of the work of the NetEthics project itself. More to come. Let us know what you think. Some of these are early efforts, like our research survey. Try it out. Let us know what you think. How can it be improved? All of this needs to be iterated and adapted. Keep your eye out. Please fill out the evaluation form that you get later this afternoon, because honestly, we're not kidding. I read every single one, and we want to know what you thought and how we can do better, I want to thank again the National Science Foundation. I mean, I think to fund work on how can the very entities that NSF and NIH and the other funders fund, how can we study them and learn and make them better and give them more tools is a really visionary move. So I want to thank the National Science Foundation. We very much look forward to continued collaboration with all of our speakers and moderators and with all of you as we try to move forward. You know, we're in the domain of 21st century research as we try to move research ethics and responsible conduct of research also solidly into the 21st century. So thank you for all of your collaborations and contributions. More to come.